Welcome to episode 10 of Eco Echoes. We've got a special guest with us today. We switched it up. Sheldon is no longer special, so we brought someone else.
I've never been special.
It's all good. It's all good. So we brought someone else to the table today. We have Dean Darren Dahl, the Dean of the UBC Sauder School of Business at the University of British Columbia. We're going to talk to him today about climate and education, and we're going to also chat with Sheldon a little bit about kind of climate in the workforce. So this concept from education into the workforce when it relates to climate. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me out, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Awesome. And for today's, I guess, a disclaimer is that both Sheldon and I actually were your students at one point in time, about 5 years ago. We both did the UBC here at, we did not the UBC, we did the MBA at UBC, too many acronyms. And yeah, we're part of your class. However, I'm really excited for this conversation, particularly because I think at our time, there was not as much focus on climate education. And so it's interesting to see. I don't know too much about how much has changed, but I know that there's been rumblings about the changes that have happened in the last 5 years. So very excited to hear about that and learn about that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome.
It's good to see you both. You've changed a lot since the classroom.
Exactly.
Is that for
I don't
better?
know if that's a compliment. I hope.
We'll leave it at that.
I love it. Yeah, so just to get started, Darren, I guess, and again, usually we start off with a pretty broad overview. I guess, what's your perspective on climate and sustainability education when it comes to education at the UBC Sauder School of Business? What's kind of the overarching philosophy there?
Well, I think, climate education and sustainability education, they're a bit different, actually. They've been topics or areas of interest to students for quite some time. Actually, for over a decade, we've had students, put up their hand and say, I'd love it if we had a class on this, or we could have a class on that, almost always relating to environment, sustainability, and climate. However, it's only in the last 5 or so years that there's been outcomes that students could actually pursue and find employment in. And so though there was an interest in some of these topics, there wasn't really jobs or places to go if you centered on these topics, 10 years ago. But we've seen that change. In some ways, I'd say it's almost been a revolution. That now there are outcomes, opportunities that we didn't see, even 5 years ago, that students that are excited about this area and these topics of study, they now can, find employment and go on and be quite successful. Sheldon is a remarkable example of that. Relatively unemployable before, but now, making a real contribution because this is an area that business needs to be involved in.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting because I think to that point, we often would have thought of roles or jobs in climate and sustainability to be more on the sciences or what have you. It's interesting to see the shift now as being part of the business school kind of curriculum and kind of that focus for needing that business talent in those types of roles.
I mean, when I became the dean, talking with the other faculty deans, specifically the Dean of Science, the Dean of Forestry, Applied Science, they said to me, we've been working in this area, climate specifically, for a number of years. We have a pressing problem. We're hoping the business school can now take science and bring it to market. It's great to discover. That's the job of these faculties. But unless it actually gets utilized by business, we're not going to solve anything. And so it's kind of an imperative that business gets involved here and builds businesses and scales businesses such that we can, create opportunity for people, again, that are excited about working in this space.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that too, because when I started my career in climate related stuff, it was I started in 2014. That was out of undergrad, right? And that was out of engineering school. And I remember positioning myself for business school and putting into my application, which I doubt he read. But it was premised on, yes, I have a good understanding of this technical stuff, and then I want to figure out how to apply this specifically within the business world. And that was within the time frame that Darren's talking about, right? And so it is, I have seen that myself, even in myself in a sense, over the last 10 or so years.
But then to you then, Sheldon, beyond your own personal experience, which, I mean, you're obviously in a sense a bit climate forward. I don't know what the
Climate
progressive. I don't know what the word is, but in a sense, you are in like you've been thinking about this stuff for 10 years, let's say.
Sure.
Like from the perspective of the wider workforce, are there any of these like opportunities that you see coming up when it relates to climate sustainability and business in the workforce? Like,
yeah,
what's
I mean,
your-
it's the way that I think about it is climate. Every job, in a sense, is a climate job. In that there is an aspect, at least, to every job where climate plays a role, and certainly within the business world, that is true as well, right? Because if let's say you're a publicly traded organization. If you don't have any kind of credible climate strategy, and the word credible, obviously there's a lot of nuance around that, then you will potentially lose out on investors, on customers, and especially more so on people who want to work for your organization. Yeah. So there has been certainly a push towards a need for more people kind of within this space.
Okay. Awesome. So then back to you, Darren, getting kind of more specific. I know we talked kind of about more of an overview, but getting more specific as it relates to climate and sustainability education at Sauder. What are maybe the trends that we're seeing, or what are the changes that have happened in the last few years, actually, even just as an update?
Sure. I think it's important to understand when you talk about education in almost any faculty, whether it's arts or science or dentistry or business, it's dynamic. I think a lot of students come to school and they think the program or the pedagogy is pretty static. And if you came in 1980, you'd get the same experience that you'd get in 2020. And that's just not true. The business school and pedagogy is incredibly dynamic. And so what we teach today is going to be very different than what we teach in 5 years and 10 years. And so, when you talk about sustainability and climate education, it first started to show up in the program about 15 years ago. But it wasn't a central focus. It would be what I would call a weave into courses. And by weave, I mean it would start to integrate maybe a couple of hours out of the 40 hours in an undergrad class, you'd raise that topic, right? And so you'd start to see it weaving into programs more and more, to the point that at some time, there would be enough content or pedagogy or discussion point that you could create a course. And then maybe another course. And then maybe a concentration. And so that's often the way that pedagogy evolves, is it starts in a very small way, weaving into courses, and then it becomes more fulsome and becomes, potentially even a degree.
So the development of that pedagogy, I imagine there's a few drivers behind it. Is one of them kind of, let's say, you're just getting questions from existing students, prospective students around, hey, this is something that I really care about. Why is this not integrated into this program or curriculum? Or
it's three lines. One is student, so from bottom up, I would say, in terms of students putting up their hand and saying, I have a question, and then boom, that's something you have to address or come back the next class and address. Second would be from faculty. So we have about 10 to 20% of our faculty that are focusing their research on climate and sustainability topics. And so because they're excited about that, right, they're going to bring that into the classroom. A good example is me. I study innovation and creativity. I brought that into the classroom, created a course that you two were punished to take. So, part of it, that second line would be from faculty. And then the third actually is from external, from government or corporation. We review our programs every periodic cycle, and we take input from our stakeholders externally. And so they may push us to think about X, Y, or Z within a program. So really it's three ways that you feel, motivation to change. And that happens not just in climate and sustainability. That can be everything, from AI to entrepreneurship to EDI topics to globalization issues. So, over the years, these programs continue to change and evolve. And this is one of the big changes in the last 5 years, I would say.
No, it's interesting to see. I think like the one thing that I've heard rumblings about, and I'm not as into this community, I would say. I am maybe a bit more now, but like the climate stream in the MBA, right? Like that wasn't something that existed 5 years ago when you were in the program. We had I believe, like a course on, well, we chose to take a course, sustainability and innovation, I believe.
Yeah.
There were a couple other things, courses available, but to see like a full stream now focused on climate, it's kind of, fascinating to me, but
I mean, for us, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would say is, and this is like any business, I mean, education's not business,
Mm-hmm.
but you're still looking for ways to be a bit different,
Mm-hmm.
to attract students from around the world, students that might be passionate about X, Y, or Z. And so you see a lot of business schools and frankly universities saying, oh, we want to be good at this, or we want to be good at that. And so when we looked at, where we sit here in Vancouver, the type of students that come here, this is a natural fit for us to try to expand this type of programming, because it's something that we can own. Whether it's true or not, that Vancouver is a climate center around the world, we could certainly debate that for a few minutes. It is perceived to be. The birthplace of Greenpeace, for example. And often we find progressive people like Sheldon that just randomly show up. And we want to captivate that. And bring that into the family. So it was a strategic decision, by the school to start to focus more in this area.
On the business side.
Well, I'll add, first of all, by no means a progressive person. I am as conservative as they possibly can come.
Okay, sure.
But I will say, my perception of, so I grew up in Toronto, right? I grew up in Ontario.
I'm so sorry for that.
Oh, wow. Hold up.
Move on.
Too soon.
But part of the reason I decided to pursue a business school here at Sauder at UBC was actually the characterization, and let's call it the narrative that the University of British Columbia has around sustainability, and the perception, to your point, that sustainability is characteristic and a strength of the institution at large. What I did find, which is interesting, is when I started at the Sauder School of Business specifically, I found that was not the case at Sauder. And so, like, thinking of that that was 7 years ago now, and thinking as to what it is today, now I do see it integrated in a variety of different ways. And so I do, I have an appreciation, I guess, for pushing for that, for incorporating climate and articulating it as, a strength of the institution.
Sure. I think, and that's not an unusual experience. And frankly, I would say that some people might still have that experience. I think some people would come to the business school and think that every second and every waking moment of what you're learning is going to be focused on sustainability or climate. And that's just not the case. And with intent. My personal belief, and this is now you're getting editorial, is if you really want to be successful in this space, it's not about being in a wind chamber or a wind tunnel and just hearing the same thing over and over. It's actually being exposed to fundamentals that might not have a lot to do with climate at first blush, but having that base, right? Let's say in accounting or finance, which sometimes, aren't always climate. They can be, right? But having that breadth of perspective beyond just a climate view is going to make you better in terms of assessing climate in a business context. And I know Sheldon agrees with me.
Well, and that was a formative part of the MBA for me, because like the best part in my mind of a lot of the program was effectively the debates that we would have in class, because we would have, and of the two general cohorts, you were in a different one, and I was in the one that was heavily argumentative all the time, and largely
this is a shocker.
But a lot of it was centered around environmental topics and to an extent social topics as well. And then you have those people, to your point, who are pushing for an agenda or like a perspective that is very left-leaning from political spectrum perspective, and then you have those who are more right-leaning. I don't think we would have anybody who's very hard right. I think there might be exceptions to that, but I think like just the mix of that and the fact that you were having these like engaging discussions, like it's something that I today still kind of pursue. I get into arguments with all sorts of people
Yeah,
all the
I
time.
know.
Just walking down the streets,
Yeah.
he starts arguing.
People don't like me.
Just randomly, yeah. No, but I think that the thing that's really interesting for me, even though we've been friends for many years, I've, in a sense, always put off learning about a lot of this stuff. Not intentionally, but just, I guess, I don't know why.
It is.
However, I will say this podcast has been really helpful.
We
to
call
help
that
me learn.
reactionary.
Yeah, very reactionary, very delayed reaction. But it's been really interesting to kind of realize, I guess, more and more that, like, to both your points here, is that, like, climate is by no means an isolated thing. If anything, it is heavily influenced by business and heavily influenced by politics. That's kind of my other big takeaway from this podcast, let's say at that highest level. And so it's been really interesting to kind of really come to realization with that, is it's an industry that's going to be not just heavily influenced by the science, but really heavily influenced by, like, how you commercialize that science.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously then by policy that in a sense helps, like, accelerate or potentially decelerate what's actually happening, potentially in education or even in the workforce and the economy as it relates to climate and sustainability.
Sure.
And that, I guess maybe many industries are like that. It's just, I think climate is one of those where it's just become very crystal clear to me that that's the case. And I guess it's good to start at least at the education level, because that's ultimately the foundation for a lot of folks.
I think Sheldon captured it best
by
saying, it was an arena for debate and discussion. And that actually makes me very happy, because my fundamental belief in education is not that it's a dogma, indoctrination centered. This should be an experience when you come to university where you have healthy debate. It actually hurts me a little bit that you say that you didn't find any conservative people here in the
There's some.
in the building.
Well, no, I was there.
I think you need them all.
I
want
agree.
them to discuss, and that's how you learn. That's how you come to hopefully real truth versus opinion and conjecture, and that is what universities are supposed to do, is to create healthy debate so that people can learn.
Definitely. More questions to you, Darren, about, like, just, I guess, what's happening at Sauder and maybe just even broadly in the industry. I'm curious. How do you find, I'm thinking, like, more of not just outside of the program. So, like, for us, for example, we do this podcast in collaboration with the UBC Center for Climate and Business Solutions.
Nice.
Wow, well done.
Yeah, it took me 10 episodes to get that acronym down. No, but I guess, like, with even things like that, right? So things that are even outside of the typical coursework, like, what was the prerogative for something like that to come about and exist? I mean, I know it's still, that one's still fairly recent,
right,
but it's still under the faculty.
Well, I think a big part of education today is the other opportunities that run alongside, your classroom experience. And, again, go back 20, 30, 40 years, you'd come to school and you'd sit in a classroom, you'd take notes, and then you'd go home. And there wasn't a lot that surrounded that. And now we see, initiatives from X, Y to Z run by students, run by staff, run by faculty members themselves, that add a lot more of, I would say, texture to the student experience. And that can be everything from, we do an initiative in Africa where we work in the slums in Nairobi to help entrepreneurs, right? That's an experience that is not really a classroom experience. We have another program where, we have an endowment of over $10 million that students get to run that endowment in terms of investment. And that's not a normal classroom experience. And so when you think about, what are the different types of experiences that students can have as they come to university, you want to find more and more opportunities. And certainly as the dean, that is, I feel my mandate, and what I want to do is find more experiences so that when you come to university, yes, you get a great education in the classroom, but you can also get inspired and you can do something that, gives you purpose and opens your eyes and maybe shakes your core beliefs a little bit. And so the Climate Center, that's, as you're correct, has only been around for a year and a bit, is something that we can leverage to create more experiences for students. And, one of the things that I'm very excited about with respect to that center is a climate clinic, climate lab. Still not clear what they're going to call it, but it's going to be a center where students can have, experiences based in this area, whether it's learning about, how do we measure carbon in a business context, to, how can we build businesses that can leverage, some of the science coming out of UBC. how can we build education frames for K-12 that can actually get kids excited beyond just, making posters and buttons, but actually thinking about, well, how can I start a business that can help climate, right? That's not in the K-12 education currently, but that could be something this climate clinic could help produce, and that would be a really cool experience for a student coming through the business school. Yeah,
no, for sure. I think it's that experiential learning aspect, right? I think more and more, and for ages, I guess that's been, I think, a key aspect of education. Like, we both went to the University of Waterloo, where co-op was a really big thing. I mean, co-op is also, or internships are a big part of UBC Sauder, and I think that being able to graduate or leave university at some point with having done something outside of the classroom, whether it's like a work experience, a cool project, a student club, but in a field or area that's related to where you want to go work, like that, the advantage of that is pretty significant. And maybe then to Sheldon, I guess, how have you, I know you've like recruited people for within your current company, and you network within the industry quite a bit. Like, are you finding that like fresh graduates are maybe better prepared today than they were in the past? Or not? Like, well, where are we on that scale?
I'll describe kind of exactly usually what we look for in terms of getting people straight out of university in general. The ideal scenario is that we have people who have some kind of knowledge or experience or have taken, like, let's say, a course that revolves around greenhouse gas accounting, right? Okay. That's the foundation for a lot of the work that we do. And it is effectively the foundation for a lot of climate work, right? To Darren's point, like, that's how you are able to measure the effectiveness of anything that is put into place in terms of a climate action for any type of business, whether it's like a corporate entity or if it's an energy organization. That is a foundation for it. And so right now, I know it's kind of like we're in the middle of figuring this out. And I say that because like, I have consistent discussions with people kind of within the recruiting realm, who, like, a lot of them say that, we want people to have this skill set, and it takes time and energy for us as a business out of, like, where we could be generating revenue and, actively working as a business, to have to train these people. Obviously, training is a part of bringing somebody into a job in the first place, but having them go through that formal training, which is what we actually have a lot of our new grads do, like, take some time and energy out of us. And on top of that, I guess, just as it pertains to the climate clinic that Darren was referring to, I've been a part of at least one of the sessions that's been taking place. And the reason I say that it is happening is that, like, there were these students who have taken a course that does take some of that into consideration. And I've mentioned this to Darren, I was shocked, like, positively shocked, that these students were on top of everything that they're talking about, and they were enthusiastic, and they were asking really good questions. And so that, to me, was actually a very good signal that I could take back to some of the people that I talk to, within my network of the people who are hiring, and say, like, hey, these are students that are engaged, and they know what they're doing. And, some of them are graduating or soon to graduate within the next, like, year or two. These are the people that we should be looking for when we're looking to scale up the workforce.
No, that's very interesting. I guess that connection, I think, is critical. And I guess as it becomes now more part of the norm of the program to have these, not just the courses, but these clinics, these other things that are adjacent, these experiences, these internships, making sure that people that are actually going into the workforce are kind of coming with that skill set, a bit of a competitive edge as well, to be able to go and contribute right from day one into their roles in, like, climate and sustainability as well. Cool. Awesome. So just a couple more questions forward looking. So we kind of laid the groundwork, got a good sense of how things are today. But are there any, like, future trends from your perspective, Darren, in climate education that, the school is pursuing? Is there anything else that's, like, coming up that you're excited about?
Well, I think when you look forward, and that's, at least to me, what's kind of exciting about this area, there's still a lot of uncertainty. And uncertainty creates opportunity. And I think that's, to me, what's most exciting. Like, what does it mean in terms of not meeting climate goals? You know, how do we move to adaptation? How do we think about everything from, let's say, insurance as an industry being disrupted by climate? How do we think about transportation moving forward when it comes to climate, right? How do we move consumer behavior to be more than just talk? A lot of what we see in the marketplace around this area is cheap talk. At the end of the day, you know, the average consumer or average person isn't really going to stretch much. Like, they're just not. We don't. So when you look at that as uncertainty, you know, that becomes kind of interesting to me. And that's where I think there's going to be real opportunity, both for the university and education, but more for students coming out. And while I agree with Sheldon, you know, you want to have them trained up, tooled up, right? Understanding, you know, carbon accounting to some degree. I think that's quite valuable. I would be more excited if I could have students coming out of here just being really curious about what can I do, what can I add to the discussion, you know, in this specific space. And again, I know Sheldon doesn't disagree with me on this. We have lots of conversations here. But I think the school, you know, the business school here needs to embrace some of that uncertainty, which is hard for universities. We're very slow, right? But embrace that uncertainty and think about, you know, where can we add value in this broader question of where are we going here? And how can, you know, we position the university, and specifically the business school, to be a bit more at the forefront of where we're going to go. And that's a challenge, I think. But I think that's something that I would like to see as we move forward. I guess the last thing I'd say, then I'd flip it over to Sheldon, is I think the future holds more partnerships for the school when it comes to these types of questions. And that's something, you know, the university isn't always good at, and that's a whole philosophical discussion. Like, where does business sit with university education? Maybe it shouldn't, and there's a good argument that stay away. Right? and that's a great view, and it's an important view. But, you know, I think the counter is everybody needs to get in the sandbox together. So we have organizations like the Bank of Montreal, right, who is giving us a very significant donation to help build this climate clinic and lab out. And that's an organization that sees this as important moving forward. And we want to join hands. Other organizations, often smaller, mid-sized type businesses, you know, often run by our alumni, want to come back and give back in a way. And so partnerships with those types of organizations, Bright Spot is a good example of that, right, is another thing that we have to think about. And so that's a bit of a shock to the tradition that universities should be more isolated and not as connected. So I think that will be a big part of the future in this space as well. So a couple of thoughts to kick around.
That's interesting. I think that collaboration piece is it's key, I guess, to bridge that gap between, you know, what students are learning, but getting them ready for the workforce, getting input about like what the workforce needs as well.
See, there's a fun one. Is it the job of the university to get kids ready, young people ready, old people ready for the workforce? Some people think that's our job. We should be a training school.
I guess.
I would disagree.
Fair enough. Okay.
The job of the university isn't necessarily to train you to push a button in the workforce. The job of the university is to create better citizens that have a more forward-looking view, that can employ tools like critical thinking, curiosity, discovery, logic. We could use a bit of that sometimes, right? And by doing that, then they're ready, and they're going to be better in terms of creating value in the workforce. Not everybody agrees with me, though.
No.
And then typically it comes down to being a balance. And what is the right balance is the question.
Interesting.
I think I'm thinking of this in the context just of the energy transition in general, right? The global energy transition, which is in a sense underway, or not in a sense, it is underway. There are all sorts of nuances and differences region to region and country to country and all of that stuff. But I think, you know, in a sense, complementary to Darren's point, I don't want to, it's not a compliment.
Contradict.
Wait, what was that? Did I hear agreement?
No. It's complimentary with the E, not with the I.
Wow.
But is the fact that if we're using that definition of university or that characterization of university, then those people who are coming out of university will be able to contribute to that transition at large, but in a bunch of ways that we, some of which we don't know, which are going to be really innovative, really cool, and possibly, move the needle as well. Possibly, probably, more than possibly, probably, or definitely move the needle on some of this stuff. And so, it's interesting too, because I'm just thinking about, there were two important pieces of legislation. We talked about this very briefly this morning, that passed actually yesterday at the federal level. One is the Sustainable Workforce Act, which is, bringing along everybody in terms of energy transition, so Canadian piece of legislation. The other one is an investment tax credit that's intended to be directed towards scaling up clean energy across Canada. And so it's, just thinking about the role of a university in getting students to a point where they can figure their way out all of these different mechanisms and tools that are out there, some of which are being driven by government, some of which are being driven by partnerships, like you mentioned, the BMO partnership, right? And effectively figuring out that whole mess and what they can contribute to it and change within it as well. I think that'd be, that's a great way to look at it.
And in a sense that the industry, especially maybe with climate, it is going to be constantly changing, or it is changing. It is maybe at I don't want to say a tipping point, but it's a place where it's still changing rapidly. And so preparing the students beyond just with the technical skills, but with that curiosity, and drive to actually be able to figure things out once they're in the workforce 5-10 years from now, when things are actually changing and maybe very different. Maybe we're not doing carbon accounting, then we're doing something else. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. So then just to wrap things up, we'll kind of, again, bring it now maybe back even further to the individual. Any tips for, I'll say, aspiring students or workers? So you can kind of take it however you want. Maybe if you want to think about, Darren, aspiring students, whether it's students coming into these programs or even leaving these programs. And any kind of advice or thoughts?
Well, I think the big advice, and this is students and beyond students, right? And I think you both are a good example. This is a compliment. Wait for it. I think it's important to always just look outside the lane that you're in and be interested in what's going on around you beyond, your current specific focus. So if you're a student, for example, and you've come into the school and you've got your heart set on working in HR or working in logistics, and that's awesome, right? You're taking courses, it's your major, that's your lane, and you're gonna own it, you're gonna kill it, it's gonna be amazing. That's great. But I think my big advice would be, look outside the lane a bit. Be interested. Get involved in something that's almost, at a right angle to what it is that you're doing. Add some texture to your path that might be completely different or completely surprising to someone that doesn't know you, right? And so when you say you've engaged in conversation on this, and that you haven't, and now you're doing something slowly, right? That's a good exemplar of what I'm saying, right? You've got a direction that you've chosen after your MBA, and you've wandered a bit, I know, but you have a direction. But you're also adding some texture by doing something else that's a bit interesting, and I think that makes us better. I really do, and it also makes you more capable, in that straight line that you've drawn, because you have a more rounded view. And I think that's missing for a lot of people in today's society. And so coming in as a student, because I guess that's what I should speak to directly, be a little random. Be a little bit more curious, because that will, in the long run, add a lot of value. So that's what I would end with.
I love it. Thank you, Darren. And then maybe final thoughts from Sheldon on this topic. Any kind of advice?
I have no advice. No advice whatsoever.
No advice. You just don't want anyone to take a job in climate. Is that
Absolutely
it?
Not.
Hashtag role model.
yeah, exactly.
No, I think the rounded nature or getting a rounded perspective on things is something that I very much care about. And it's specifically actually just specific to climate even, because like I mentioned when we started today, right? My perception is every job has an aspect to it that is climate related. And so by broadening the horizons of whatever it is that you're looking at, whether it is towards or, distinct from climate even, it is providing a better, more holistic like perspective that can help move things forwards, right? And this is something, and I know even in my world, like I know plenty of people who are squarely focused on, this government is doing this and I'm aligned with it, and I'm aligned with the businesses that are aligned with it. And my thinking is sitting here, I'm like, that's great. And what happens when inevitably this government changes within the space of 4 years? Then you're going to be completely thrown off, and then it's going to change everything. Like, you need to consider what that other perspective is in order to like to mitigate the risk associated with being one, but also to seek out the opportunities, like to create or to look at those partnerships, right? And so I think, I think the advice is good, like to ensure that people are well-rounded and that they're looking beyond what's an ophthalmology analogy here.
I don't know, but in a sense, I think to your point though, I think what's interesting, I think maybe particularly because climate is politically influenced, like probably one of the fields that have like the workforce will be politically influenced, the workforce will be heavily influenced by potentially politics, government,
possibly.
Like in a sense, there is some of that, like potentially these cycles, let's say, right? And so anyone in that space needs to be like adaptable, open to change, open to collaborating with other, people who maybe have differing opinions or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks, folks. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this episode and for, wrapping up season 1 of Eco Echoes. Thank you, Darren, for joining us.
Yeah,
today was a fun conversation.
Very far out of your way to come here today.
Yeah.
It was a stretch to walk down the stairs.
And thanks for hosting us. Yeah.
Admittedly, you went to the wrong place first.
It's been our pleasure to see the two of you back at the school.
I appreciate it.
So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, awesome. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Cheers.